Greetings comrades. Today I'll be making a video which will be the first in a series of videos explaining important Marxist concepts from my own perspective. Viewers should note that my ideology is kind of a weird mix of Leninism, Trotskyism, Maoism and Titoism, kind of cherry-picked different ideas that seem to work in those countries and try and apply them to my own country's national conditions. But I'll be explaining how different countries apply these concepts in practice and the results of these applications. Later I'll be making some videos explaining how they could apply in the modern era. The first topic will be one of the most important when it comes to building a socialist state, and that is the dictatorship of the proletariat. This concept is tied in with the Marxist view of the role of the state and therefore its interpretation in application has a massive and important effect on society. The Marxist view on the role of the state is that the state is the vehicle with which one class oppresses another. Now, we live in the era of the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. The state as we know it is the vehicle with which the capitalist class oppresses the working class. The state organs serve to protect the interests of the capitalist class, such as the police to keep order, the government and the army to wage war to further the imperialist goals of the capitalist class. Liberal democracy, as we Marxists see it, is the democracy of the bourgeois class, as most Western mainstream parties, the two or three parties the voters have to choose from, are not representative of the working class interests. They serve the interests of the bourgeois class and are ultimately subservient to them. I think no one in Europe knows this more than the people of Greece right now. And the initial aim of the communist revolution is to overthrow the bourgeois class and the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie and replace it with the dictatorship of the working class, so that the working class takes on a governing role in society and makes decisions according to their own needs. But what form does this dictatorship take? Marx and Engels viewed the Paris Commune as the perfect example of how this dictatorship should apply in society. In the wake of the Prussian invasion of France, Parisians took power from the state by force of arms and implemented a form of extreme democracy. Here's Engels' description of it. The Commune made use of two infallible expedients. In the first place, it filled all posts, administrative, judicial and educational, by election on the basis of universal suffrage of all those concerned, with the right of those same electors to recall their delegate at any time. And in the second place, all officials, high or low, were only paid the wages received by other workers. The highest salary paid by the Commune to anyone was 6,000 francs. In this way, an effective barrier to place hunting and careerism was set up, even apart from the binding mandates to the delegate and the representative bodies, which also added in profusion. Moreover, noting that the state is at best an evil inherited by the proletariat after its victorious struggle for class supremacy, whose worst sides the proletariat, just like the Commune, cannot avoid having to lop off at the earliest possible moment, until such a time as a new generation, reared in a new and free social conditions, will be able to throw the entire lumber of the state on the scrap heap. Marx's attention to the Paris Commune was placed in the centre of later Marxist forms. Now, you can delve further into the short history of the Paris Commune, but as I said, Marx and Engels viewed it as an example of dictatorship of the proletariat. Of course, this was just one city and was set up at a time of war and was soon crushed. However, it provides a beacon of hope for Marxists and anarchists everywhere. Still, how could this be applied to an entire country? The first attempt was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, formed under the leadership of Vladimir Lenin and the Bolshevik Party from 1917 until Lenin's death in 1924. Lenin had a fiery view of how the dictatorship of the proletariat should be applied and wrote about it at length, but like all his writings, his thoughts are somewhat open to interpretation. Firstly of note is the Soviet or Workers' Council, set up to facilitate direct democracy for the working class, where their representatives would debate and make decisions on the running of society. During this time, the bourgeois class had been overthrown in Russia, and though they were waging war against the Bolsheviks, they did not directly govern the working class. So what was the relationship between the working class, their dictatorship, and their state? Engels spoke of the state as a revolutionary weapon. He says, as, therefore, the state is only a transitional institution which is used in the struggle in the revolution to hold down one's adversaries by force, it is sheer nonsense to talk of a free people's state. So long as the proletariat still needs the state, it does not need it in the interest of freedom, but in order to hold down its adversaries. And as soon as it becomes possible to speak of freedom, the state, as such, ceases to exist. Now, while Lenin viewed it as the means of expanding democracy whilst excluding the capitalists. Lenin says, the dictatorship of the proletariat, i.e. the organisation of the vanguard of the oppressed as the ruling class for the purpose of suppressing the oppressors, could not result merely in an expansion of democracy. Simultaneously, with an immense expansion of democracy, which for the first time becomes democracy for the poor, democracy for the people, and not democracy for the moneybags, the dictatorship of the proletariat involves a series of restrictions on the freedom of the oppressors, the exploiters, the capitalists. We must suppress them in order to free humanity from wage slavery, and their resistance must be crushed by force. It is clear that there is no freedom and no democracy where there is suppression and where there is violence. He also says, at that time, the state was engaged in the oppression of the bourgeois class in the form of civil war and the suppression of class enemies, i.e. collaborators with the white armies, whilst the Soviets or workers' councils were directed by the workers towards running day-to-day life. The state administered these decisions, and the party, the vanguard of the working people, in Lenin's view, created strategies and again, through workers' representatives, made decisions on the running of the country. The USSR at that point, led by Lenin, was as democratic as any state could expect it to be under the conditions of an incredibly violent civil war and an imperialist intervention. Workers' self-management and local democracy existed, but were of course hampered by the need to provide for the war effort to continue the functioning of the state as an effective weapon of the working class against their enemies. Marx said, the victorious party in a revolution must maintain its rule by means of the terror which its arms inspire in reactionaries. This statement can be interpreted in two ways. I take it to mean that the working class asserts its authority by virtue of being armed, just as the bourgeois state asserts its own authority through its own armed organs, the army and the police. Some, however, took this in a different direction, namely Joseph Stalin. Stalin's rule, whatever its achievements, is considered to be a black spot on the history of Marxism, mostly due to his interpretation of the dictatorship of the proletariat. Stalin took the idea of the state as a weapon to the extreme in his hunt for reactionaries, traitors and class enemies, terror being a key weapon in his arsenal. The state and its authority returned to its original role in Russia, comparable to that under the Tsar. Some would say that this is vital in order to fight fascism and capitalist encirclement to defend the workers' state, whilst others say it was a gross distortion of Marxism. In any case, workers' self-management, Soviet democracy, workers' self-defense through militia were curtailed in favour of state control, in modernising the country, fighting a victorious war against the Nazis, and creating a superpower. Whether or not you think this was a correct application of the workers' dictatorship is an opinion I will leave to you, the viewer. However, left communists take a different view on Marxism, stating that the party, instead of being the vanguard of the working class, should play a broader role in the struggle. Rosa Luxemburg said, "This dictatorship consists in the manner of applying democracy, not in its elimination, but in the energetic, resolute attacks upon the well-entrenched rights and economic relationships of bourgeois society, and without which a socialist transformation cannot be accomplished. This dictatorship must be the work of the class, and not of a little leading minority in the name of the class. That is, it must proceed step by step out of the active participation of the masses. It must be under their direct influence, subjected to the control of complete public activity. It must arise out of growing political training of the mass of the people." Now, unfortunately, Rosa Luxemburg was murdered by the state after the failed German Revolution in 1919. And a left communist state hasn't been set up, with the possible exception of South Yemen, which comrades in my party informed me was comparable to a left communist state. However, unfortunately, I don't know much about this state, so if anyone has any good research on the subject, I would love to see it. Titoism is another variant. Yugoslav economics was a mixed socialist market economy. State-owned industries were run through workers' self-management and workers' councils, which were fully democratic, whilst small private cooperatives were also formed, and this was similar to Lenin's new economic policy. And this seems to have functioned very well at times, and I feel this model could be used as an intermediary step between capitalism and socialism, as it provides worker control over the means of production. The dictatorship is meant as a temporary step in building socialism, overthrowing capitalism and giving power to the working class. Some, however, used it as a way of giving extreme democracy to the people, and others used it as a weapon to destroy their enemies. Marx provides no blueprint for how such a dictatorship should be run, but he does say this. Of late, the social democratic Philistine has once more been filled with wholesome terror at the words dictatorship of the proletariat. Well and good, gentlemen, do you want to know what this dictatorship looks like? Look at the Paris Commune. That was the dictatorship of the proletariat. If you have any ideas, thoughts, good sources of information about the application of the dictatorship of the proletariat, I'd love to see it and factor it into future videos. I hope you learned something from this video. If you have any more questions, drop a comment. Thank you very much for listening.